Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome back to another episode of the Carnivore Kitchen podcast. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of being properly assessed and having some steak. And if you want to learn how to tenderize a steak to make it even more juicy and delicious, then check out the link in the description. The name of today's episode is If You're Not Assessing, You're Guessing. And if you want to create an effective exercise program, then you need to learn how to properly assess, and the assessments that you perform will depend upon the training goal of the individual. When it comes to training goals, there are an infinite amount of goals one may have, but at the end of the day, they are all going to fall into one of three categories. People either want to look better, feel better, or perform better. If someone wants to look better, then they are typically looking to build muscle, lose fat, or do a combination of the two. If somebody wants to feel better, then they are typically looking to either reduce joint pain, improve posture and function, or strengthen weak muscles. Lastly, if someone wants to perform better, then they are typically looking to either improve athletic performance, or, for non-athletes, then they are typically looking to make daily tasks easier. For athletes looking to improve athletic performance, it's important to know that there are 8 biomotor abilities that are going to be required to some degree in all sports. Those 8 biomotor abilities are speed, strength, power, endurance, flexibility, agility, coordination, and balance. When it comes to designing an effective exercise program, knowing those 3 goals and how to assess and program for those 8 biomotor abilities are going to be very important. If someone's goal is to look better, then 3 basic assessments you will want to perform at the start of each new program are weight measurements, skin fold measurements, and anthropometric measurements. The weight measurements will be the simplest and will only require the use of a scale. The skin fold measurements will be used to assess body fat and are my preferred method, as high-tech equipment such as bioelectrical impedance scales are often terribly inaccurate. You will require a pair of skin fold calipers, which can be quite pricey for a good pair, but there are several benefits to using skin fold calipers. One of those benefits is the fact that there are hormonal correlations with various skin fold sites, and by knowing these correlations, you can design a more effective exercise and nutrition plan. The skinfold calipers I use are the Harpenden skinfold calipers, and the method that I use for assessing is the biosignature modulation method, which was created by world-renowned strength coach Charles Poliquin and taught to me in 2010. The biosignature modulation method consists of measuring 14 skinfold sites: the chin, cheek, pectoral, biceps, triceps, subscapular, low back, mid-axillary, suprailiac, umbilicus, knee, calf, quadriceps, and hamstrings. I would highly encourage you to look into taking either a biosignature modulation course or a metabolic analytics course for learning how to administer the various skinfold assessments, and also learn about the hormonal correlations and how to use that information to rapidly improve body composition. However, if you choose not to, then there are also other skinfold caliper methods online that you can use for free. Prior to 2010, I was using the Perillo caliper method on the Linear software website, and it consists of 9 skinfold sites. The reason I used this method was because, of all the methods on the Linear software website, I personally found it to be much more accurate than the Jackson Pollock 3, 4, and 7 site skinfold caliper methods and the Dernan-Womersley 4-site skinfold caliper method. With regard to the skinfold sites and the hormonal correlations, the pectoral, biceps, and triceps skinfold sites relate to androgen production, or your testosterone sites. The pectoral, quadriceps, and hamstrings are your gynoid sites, or your estrogen sites. The subscapular, low back, and suprailiac are your insulin sites. Your triceps, knee, and calf are your recovery sites, or your growth hormone sites. Your low back, knee, and hamstrings are your toxicity sites. Your umbilicus is your cortisol site, and your mid-axillary is your thyroid site. While these skinfold sites aren't 100% accurate, they're pretty damn close. I always ask my clients and patients to get blood work done, and 80% of the time, the hormonal correlations are spot on with the blood work. Most of the skinfold sites have a very high correlation rate, whereas the one skinfold site where I've personally seen the lowest correlation is the mid-axillary as it relates to thyroid. Once you've assessed weight and measured body fat, then the last thing you want to measure are the anthropometric measurements. These are girth measurements of various body areas, and all you will need is a tape measure. You want to make sure that at the very least, you are measuring the areas that directly relate to your client's goals. Personally, I like to measure these 9 body areas: the neck, shoulders, chest, waist, hips, thighs, calves, biceps, and forearms. One of the reasons that skinfold measurements and anthropometric measurements will be important is because oftentimes you may not notice changes on the scale, which can be discouraging, but there will be a noticeable change in both body fat and body shape, and these changes will help to keep you or your clients motivated. Taking progress pictures will also be great for visual feedback. When taking progress pictures, be sure to take them against a plain background and perform all 3 assessments under the exact same conditions, the same lighting, time of day, and posing. Personally, I prefer to assess and take pictures first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, and I like to take 4 pictures at the start of each new program, 1 from the front, 1 from the right side, 1 from the back, and 1 from the left side. Next, let's say you or your client isn't too concerned with aesthetics and their goal is to feel better. What feeling are they trying to improve? Do they want to decrease joint or muscle pain, increase energy levels, improve their digestion? Are they trying to get off certain medications? If someone wants to feel better, then 10 basic assessments that you want to perform are a postural assessment, passive range of motion tests, active range of motion tests, manual muscle testing, stability assessment, movement assessment, waist to hip ratio or waist to height ratio, HCl test, blood glucose test, and a zinc tally test. I'm not going to spend too much time detailing these various assessments, as I'll be dedicating a future video to them, but I will briefly touch on each of them. For the postural assessment, you want to perform a visual postural assessment, which will be subjective, and also measure various postural markers, which will be objective. For the visual postural assessment, either a static postural assessment using a plumb line or a static postural assessment against a grid wall will be ideal. A static postural assessment with the plumb line will be the most cost-effective. All you will need is a string with some type of weight like a key or rock tied to the bottom of the string to ensure that it remains vertical, and a business card. For measuring the postural markers, some equipment that will be worth investing would be an inclinometer, a forward head caliper, and a Chek inclinometer. The passive range of motion assessment will be for all the joints in the body, and it would be wise to invest in a goniometer and an inclinometer to perform the following passive range of motion assessments. For the hips, you want to perform flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, medial rotation, and lateral rotation. For the knee and ankle, flexion, extension, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, supination, and pronation. For the shoulder, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, medial rotation, and lateral rotation. For the elbow and wrist, flexion, extension, ulnar deviation, radial deviation, supination, and pronation. And for the neck, flexion, extension, lateral flexion, and rotation. The active range of motion assessment will be the same as the passive range of motion assessment, with the only difference being that the patient will be actively performing the movements as opposed to you passively taking them through each of the movements. If you are limited for time, then you can also perform something like the Apley scratch test for the shoulder in order to test for gross shoulder movements, and a cross-legged sit and knee drop for the hip in order to test for gross hip movements by combining multiple shoulder and hip movements in one. The Apley scratch test has 3 parts and will test for horizontal adduction by reaching across and placing the palm on the opposite shoulder, flexion, abduction, and lateral rotation by reaching up overhead and touching the opposite superior border of the scapula, and extension, adduction, and medial rotation by reaching behind the back and touching the inferior angle of the opposite scapula. The cross-legged sit and knee drop has 2 parts and will test for flexion, abduction, and lateral rotation by sitting in a chair and crossing the ankle over the knee and lowering it to the floor. And it will also test for flexion, abduction, adduction, and medial and lateral rotation by sitting on the floor and dropping the knees side to side. The manual muscle testing will be the same movements as the active range of motion assessment. However, the patients will actively be performing the movements in a horizontal plane, against gravity, or against resistance from the therapist, depending on the level of conditioning of the muscle being tested. When grading the strength of each of these muscles, you can either use a 10-point scale or a 5-point scale. A 0 would be no contraction felt. A T or 1 would be contraction felt but either no visible movement or only trace movement observed. A 1 or a 2 negative is going to be partial movement in the horizontal plane. A 2 is complete range of motion through the horizontal plane. A 3 or a 2 plus moves through partial range of motion against gravity. A 4 or a 3 minus is full range of motion against gravity but cannot hold the test position. A 5 or a 3 is full range of motion against gravity and can hold the test position without added pressure. A 6 or 3 plus, the patient can hold the test position against slight pressure. A 7 or a 4 minus means the patient can hold the test position against slight to moderate pressure. An 8 or a 4 means the patient can hold the test position against moderate pressure. A 9 or a 4 plus means the patient can hold the test position against moderate to strong pressure, and a 10 or a 5 means the patient can hold the test position against strong pressure. The stability assessment will test for strength, balance, and proprioception of various joints, and will include a hip assessment where the patient will stand on one leg with a straight knee and flex the opposite knee and hip to 90 degrees with their eyes closed. The knee assessment, the patient will stand on one leg with a bent knee and flex the opposite hip and knee to 90 degrees with the eyes closed. For the ankle assessment, the patient will stand on one leg on a balance cushion and flex both the opposite hip and knee. For the shoulder and spine, the horse stance vertical exercise will make a terrific assessment. For the lumbar spine, the patient will balance their lumbar spine on a balance cushion. For the thoracic spine assessment, the patient will balance the thoracic spine on a balance cushion while rotating side to side. For the shoulder assessment, they will balance a dowel rod near the shoulder while performing the various shoulder movements. For the elbow, they will balance a dowel rod near the elbow while performing various elbow movements. For the wrist, they will place a laser pointer between the fingers and use the wrist to write the alphabet against a wall. And for the cervical spine, they will balance an object on top of their head, forehead, and chin. The movement assessment will test for movement of the primal patterns and functional movements and will include a squat assessment, such as the heel elevated goblet squat, a barbell back squat, or an overhead squat. A lunge assessment, where you will test for forward step lunge, a forward diagonal step lunge, a lateral step lunge, a backward diagonal step lunge, a backward step lunge, and the inline lunge. The bend pattern, which will consist of an active straight leg raise, a supine hip extension, a kneeling deadlift, a conventional barbell deadlift, and a toe touch. A push assessment, which will consist of a Mackenzie press-up, a kneeling push-up, a standard push-up, and a trunk stability push-up. A pull assessment, which will consist of a prone cobra, a supine row, a supinated chin-up, a parallel grip chin-up, and a wide grip pull-up. A twist assessment, which will consist of rotary stability, mammalian crawling, and reptilian crawling. And a gait assessment, where the patient will walk, run, and sprint, and also perform something like a farmer's carry or an overhead carry. For the waist to hip ratio and the waist to height ratio, you will need a measuring tape, and you will measure the circumference of the waist and hips and height of the individual and use that information for assessing things such as visceral fat, cardiovascular disease risk, diabetes risk, all-cause mortality risk, and hypertension. The best time to measure both the waist to hip and waist to height ratios is first thing in the morning, as the stomach will be at its smallest and you will get the most accurate measurement, since there won't be any food causing your stomach to protrude outward, causing you to overestimate the ratio. Ideally, healthy men should have a waist to hip ratio below 0.95, and healthy women should have a waist to hip ratio below 0.8. Waist to height ratio assesses the same risk factors and should be below 0.5 if you want to reduce those risk factors. The HCl test is a way to assess if your stomach is producing an adequate amount of stomach acid. For the HCl test, I like to use this method that I learned from Dr. Jonathan Wright, author of the book Why Stomach Acid is Good for You. It is terrific for people with digestive issues to help heal their gut and is the method I use to help treat my ulcerative colitis. You will need to buy a bottle of betaine HCl with pepsin that contains between 500 milligrams to 650 milligrams of betaine HCl per capsule, and the way it works is as follows. First, you want to take 1 capsule of betaine HCl with a meal containing at least 6 ounces of meat. Step 2, you want to notice if you feel a warm sensation in your stomach or something resembling mild heartburn. Step 3, if you experience neither, then repeat steps 1 and 2 for all meals for the next 1 to 2 days. Step 4, if you continue to feel nothing, then increase by 1 capsule and repeat steps 1 to 3. Step 5, continue to repeat steps 1 to 4 until you feel that sensation. Step 6. When you finally feel the warm sensation or heartburn, decrease the dosage by 1 capsule. Step 7. This is your effective HCl dose. Continue to use this dose until you feel the sensation again. Step 8. Once you feel the sensation again, then decrease by 1 capsule. And finally, Step 9. Continue to repeat steps 7 and 8 until you no longer need to take any HCl. The last 2 tests will be the blood glucose test and the zinc tally test. For the blood glucose test, you will need a glucometer to measure the amount of glucose in your blood, some lancets and needles, and some testing strips. For the zinc tally test, you will need a small measuring cup and a bottle of liquid zinc sulfate to assess zinc status. Ideally, both the blood glucose test and zinc tally test should be administered in a fasting state, but you can also administer the test postprandially, meaning after a meal. For the blood glucose test, an ideal blood glucose measurement will be below 90 milligrams per deciliter or below 5 millimoles per liter in a fasted state, and below 120 milligrams per deciliter or below 6.7 millimoles per liter if administered postprandially. For the zinc tally test, you will place 10 milliliters of zinc sulfate in your mouth and let it rest on your tongue for 15 seconds. If you get a strong metallic or acidic taste in your mouth, then it indicates that you have adequate zinc levels. However, if it tastes like water, then you will gargle some water and repeat the test 5 total times. If after 5 times of performing the zinc tally test the liquid still tastes like water, then it could indicate deficiency and may be worth supplementing. However, the reliability of the zinc tally test has been debated, which is why I also make all of my clients and patients go for a full blood panel and have them tell their doctors to add these optional blood tests to the requisition form: a serum D3 test, an RBC magnesium test, and an RBC zinc test. This brings us to our last goal: perform better. If someone wants to perform better, then you must perform a needs analysis and assess each of the biomotor abilities that are directly related to their sport to see which areas they are lacking in. Again, those 8 biomotor abilities are speed, strength, power, endurance, flexibility, agility, coordination, and balance. It would also be beneficial to test their recovery. Some of the ways in which you can assess each of these biomotor abilities and their recovery are for the speed tests: a 30-meter dash, 50-meter dash, 100-meter dash, 3-cone shuttle drill, and the pro agility drill. For strength, you can do 1RM testing, 3RM testing, 5RM testing, and a muscle fiber dominance test. For power, you can use the Olympic lifts, vertical jump, standing long jump, explosive push-ups, or the salmon ladder. For endurance, you can use the beep test, VO2 max test, the RAS test, the Leger-Bouchier test, and the Cooper test. For flexibility, you can use the sit and reach test, the Thomas test, the Oberst test, and the Apley scratch test. For agility, you can use the 3-cone drill, the box drill, the arrowhead drill, the balsam agility run, shuttle run, and the quick feet test. For coordination, you could use the lower extremity motor coordination test, the stick flip test, and the W run. For balance, you can use the sit fit test, the wobble board test, the single leg balance test, and the Romberg test. And for recovery, you can use the Rouffier test, the Harvard test, the phosphate recovery test, and the 3015 intermittent fitness test. Once you've assessed each of these biomotor abilities and recovery, you want to rank each on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the gold standard for what is required for their sport. As an example, let's say that you have an athlete whose goal is to break the world record for the fastest 100-meter sprint, and their current time is 10.63 seconds, and they are able to do the front splits. Well, at the time of recording this podcast, Monday, February the 13th, 2023, the current world record is 9.58 seconds, which is held by Usain Bolt, and the normal amount of active hip extension is between 10 and 15 degrees, and the normal amount of active hip flexion is between 110 and 120 degrees. Therefore, they would need to run 100 meters in 5.97 seconds or faster in order to break the current world record. So 5.97 seconds would be considered a 10, and since their current speed is approximately 90% of what they need it to be, you can rate their speed a 9 and their flexibility a 10. Even if they're not the most flexible person on the planet, by being able to do the front splits, they already have more hip flexion and hip extension than is required for sprinting, and improving upon that would not benefit them in any way. So, you wouldn't need to include a lot of stretching exercises for the hip, since they already have adequate hip flexion and hip extension, and you can put all of your focus on developing more speed as part of their training program. Let's use another example of a powerlifter who wants to break the world record in the deadlift, and their current deadlift is 963 pounds and whose active hip extension is 5 degrees. Well, the current world record deadlift is 1,105 pounds, which is held by Hafthor Bjornsson, and between 10 and 15 degrees of active hip extension is considered normal. So, 1,106 pounds would be considered a 10 for strength, since that is how much they would need to break the current world record, and 10 degrees of active hip extension would be considered a 10, since that is what is required for normal hip function, and anything beyond that would not benefit their goal of breaking the world deadlift record. Therefore, you can rate their strength an 8.7, since they are approximately 87% of where they need to be to break the current world record, and you can rate their flexibility a 5, since they have 50% of the active hip extension required for normal function, and when you are writing their training program, you can incorporate more stretching exercises to help them improve their hip extension to reduce the chance that they will injure themselves. Hopefully, this will give you some ideas of ways in which you can assess yourself and others in order to design the best training programs possible, which will allow you to get to your goal faster, because if you want to achieve the best results possible, and in the quickest time possible, then you need to know what exactly it is that you need to focus on, and if you're not assessing, you're guessing.
Thanks for hanging around until the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and comment down in the comment section, as it would really help out with the algorithm, and also share this video so we can help get this information out to as many people as possible, and also subscribe subscribe to the channel by clicking on the icon in the bottom right-hand corner and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the videos. For those of you interested in health optimization, you can check out the video in the top right corner where I discuss the 6 foundation principles. And for those of you interested in optimizing your performance, then consider becoming a member. It's only $5 per month, and you get a ton of perks, including exclusive access to this program design lecture series playlist above my head.